Hi, grade Miss Boyd here with To Kill a Mockingbird, and I'm going to break up this video and do chapters 9 and 10, and then make another video for 11 and 12 because these chapters have a lot of information in it, so that way you can break it up and the video's not so long. And you'll see me look down at my book quite a bit because there are several sections that I want to read to you. So, chapter 9 starts off with Cecil Jacobs making fun of Scout, and you'll see Cecil a couple of times in here throughout the rest of the book. So just know that he's a classmate, and and this is kind of the first time you're seeing Scout be picked on for the case that her father is taking over. So, what's important in here is Scout is telling you this story. And when it gets to the case, you're going to see a difference between Scout and Jim because Jim is going to understand or grasp certain concepts much faster than Scout is going to. So, this is going to be a huge, I guess, learning moment. It's pivotal for Scout, and you're going to see her struggle with understanding all the different facets of the case and the prejudices of her town, what that means, etc., because she is young. So keep that in mind as you read. Scout's not necessarily going to understand everything. So you kind of learn with her literally as she learns what's going on around her. And sometimes she's totally ignorant or naive of what's happening. So you have Cecil make fun of her father because he's defending an African American. And for Scout, she goes home and she asks, like, are you defending African Americans? And of course, Cecil Jacob uses a different word, and Atticus is like, don't use that word, it's common. We're not using that in the house. And this is the first that you and the kids learn about the case. And so for Scout, she's like, I don't understand what's going on. So he describes the case with Tom Robinson. Tom Robinson goes to church with Calpurnia. He's a nice young man, and it says there's been some high talk around town to the effect that Atticus shouldn't do much about defending this man. And he says it's a strange case, and the trial won't happen until the summer. So this tells you people are already talking about it way before the time of the trial. And then it says, John Taylor was kind enough to give us a postponement. So, John Taylor, you're going to see that name a lot. That's the judge in town, Judge Taylor. John Taylor, same person. So, he's pivotal in this case, down to he gives them a postponement, which most judges wouldn't have done. He's the one who assigns or offers it to Atticus, which is also on purpose. So you learn a lot about John Taylor or Judge Taylor before you even meet him. So for Scout, she asks her father, like, if people don't think you should be defending this man, then why are you doing it? And he says, for a number of reasons, but the main one is if I didn't, I couldn't hold my head up in town. I couldn't represent this county in legislature. Couldn't even tell you or Jim not to do something. And he says every lawyer gets a case in their lifetime that affects them personally on a personal level. And for him, this is the case. And for Atticus, and this scene and how he talks about the case is what makes Atticus a moral compass, a moral character in the story. Um, that's what makes his character so endearing, is because, and all the characters in here say, Atticus is always the same inside his house and outside of his house. He is a constant moral compass. He always chooses what he thinks is right. He always acts on what he thinks is right. Always says what he thinks is right. And that's why his kids and those in the community respect him so much. So, because this case, he's going to take it no matter what, and that he feels it's a moral obligation as a lawyer and as a Christian man, he asks of his kids to hold their head high and keep your fist down. He asks Scout to do this, and Jim. And the big thing is, it's not summer yet. And when summer comes, it's going to get worse. And so he's asking now, when I guess the heat of the trial isn't on the kids and on Atticus, to learn how to not fight with their fists and to be smart about their actions. Because, I mean, this is just Cecil making fun of Scout, and it's going to get worse as the trial gets closer. And that's what he tries to teach Scout is you're going to have people that you think are your friends say awful things about me and awful things about you and our family. And you've got to learn now before it gets worse that you can't just go around punching everybody and things like that. You've got to keep your wits about you. Okay. So it says the next time she runs into Cecil, of course, and you can tell he's repeating things he's heard from adults like his parents. um, she decides, I mean, she balls her fist, but it says in here that Atticus rarely ever asks them to do something for him. So she wants to make sure um, that she does what her father asks. Okay. So you have a little break in here, and then it's Christmas. So Uncle Jack comes in town. You can see that Uncle Jack and Atticus are really, really close, and Scout loves him. He's not like your normal doctor that where you're kind of almost afraid. Like he's funny, he jokes all the time, he tells funny stories. So the kids love him, okay? And um, you find out that Scout has devised another plan to try to get Atticus to let her stay home from school, which is saying words she shouldn't. So she goes around and she cusses. And Atticus is like, oh, it's a phase. She'll get over it when she realizes she doesn't get to stay home from school. Uncle Jack's a little different. Okay. And he immediately approaches her and says, you're not doing that while I'm around. And you get to see Christmas morning, they get their gifts of their air rifles. And then they go to Finch's Landing, which is where you meet Aunt Alexandra, Uncle Jimmy. It describes him as a taciturn man, which just means he's lazy and he doesn't do anything. And Cousin Francis. So, Scout describes Francis as the most boring child she ever met. Um, and he gets things like clothes for Christmas. You can tell Scout doesn't have much in common with Francis at all. And you also see in here that Aunt Alexander and Scout don't get along at all because Aunt Alexander feels like she should be a lady, wear dresses, etc. You know, all the things that a Southern lady, should do. And Scout's like, I'm wearing my overalls and now I'm going to roll around in the dirt and play outside. So they don't get along. And because of that, you can see she treats Scout differently. So I don't know if any of y'all had this at your house, like Thanksgiving or Christmas. You always had the kids' table and the grown up table. And eventually, as you get older, you kind of graduate from the tables. Well, they have the kids' table, but the only person Aunt Alexandra makes eat there is Scout. And she kind of alienates Scout a little bit because she doesn't necessarily agree with Scout and, you know, how she's being raised and all those types of things. So they finish their meal. You all know how it is with a big old family meal like that. You're kind of like in a food coma. So she and Francis go outside. And this is where you get to meet Francis. So when you're reading this, you should think he's saying some interesting things for a young kid. So again, just like Cecil, you know he's repeating things that he's heard, and you can tell mostly it comes from Aunt Alexandra. So Francis makes fun of Dill and the fact that he doesn't have a father and he just is shipped off to family from family member to family member, and that's why he comes to make him in the summer. And of course, that makes Scout mad because she cares for Dill. And then you have this section where he runs his mouth about Atticus. So Scout keeps it together until Atticus gets in his mouth. And he talks about the fact that Atticus is defending Tom and that because of that, he's going to ruin their family name. So you'll notice in here the idea of last names It's a running theme in here. So, whatever your last name is, just like if you're a Cunningham, at the beginning of the book, that means you are poor, but you're honest and you work really hard for everything you have. Now, that's true about the Cunninghams that you've met already, but that doesn't, I mean, think about it. That's not necessarily going to be how every single Cunningham in the entire Macomb County is going to be. But that's something you see in here is whatever your last name is, people already make presumptions about you. So Aunt Alexandra has run her mouth, and Frances is continuing. The idea that because Atticus is defending Tom, he's going to ruin the Finch family name. And at this point, what Scout promised her father not to fight, it's out the window. She's done. She's going to take out Francis, and the second he lets his guard down, she punches him in the face. So immediately out comes the family, and they're trying to figure out what happened. And Francis, of course, says, Scout called me names and punched me. And Scout's like, yeah, I did. I mean, she's not lying. And so immediately, Uncle Jack comes in and spanks Scout, and Scout's like, I don't want to talk to you ever again, and I hope you die. And she runs off. So eventually, Christmas is over. They go back to Atticus's home, and Uncle Jack goes to talk to Scout. And she uses the term, you're not fair. And for Uncle Jack, he doesn't understand that. And then Scout makes him realize, well, you didn't hear my side of the story of what happened. You immediately jumped on me because of what Frances said. So Scout tells him her side of the story and all the things Frances said about Atticus. And of course, Uncle Jack is livid and wants to go back and tear him up and give Aunt Alexandra a piece of his mind. And Scout begs him not to because she tells him, Atticus asked me not to fight about what people say about him, and I want him to think I've kept my word. So this kind of parallels what Jim did with the pants. You know, both of them in these moments you see respect their father so much so that whatever he asks of them, they want to do. So it's that idea neither one of these kids want to disappoint their father. So it shows the great respect they have for Atticus. So you have this scene at the very end of this chapter where Atticus and Jack are talking. Okay. And Scout is in the hallway. She's supposed to be going to bed. And they're talking about the case and that the kids will have to, he says, absorb some pretty ugly things soon. And they talk about the Ewells. And here it's basically you learn that it's the Ewells, a white people's word, against Tom Robinson, an African American man's word. And it's literally just a he said, she said case. But it's also presenting the fact that during this time period, it doesn't matter who who's telling the truth or not. White man's word versus African American man's word. And it doesn't matter if they're the Ewells, which Atticus said, I mean, everybody knows they're trash. It doesn't matter. White man's word always wins. And that's what he kind of talks about in here is that before I'm through, Atticus says this, I intend to jar the jury a bit. Um, he just wants to present a different side to make them think about the other side and not always assume that just because Tom's African American that he's lying. And that just because the Ewells are white doesn't mean they always tell the truth. He wants to present that side to the jury, and he knows they're going to lose. But eventually, if they can appeal and go outside of Macomb County, he knows, Atticus knows they have a good shot. And then you have this paragraph I'm going to read to you at the end of the chapter. Atticus says, but do you think I could face my children otherwise? And he's saying um, he knows he has to take this case, and he wouldn't be able to look at his children if he didn't. He says, you know what's going to happen as well as I do, Jack. And I hope and pray I can get Jim and Scout through it without bitterness. And most of all, without catching Macomb's usual disease, which is prejudice. Why reasonable people go stark raving mad when anything involving a Negro comes up is something I don't pretend to understand. I just hope that Jim and Scout come to me for their answers instead of listening to the town. I hope they trust me enough. And so, of course, we know that's the case. And he wants his kids to learn that these prejudices that this small southern town or that the South in general have are wrong. Okay. And then, of course, Scout's been in the hall the whole time. And of course, at the end, you learn that her father knew she was out there, but he wanted her to hear that it's going to be tough, but that he wants her to come and talk to him anytime that it is. That his opinion is not biased in any way, and that he wants his kids to come and talk to him first before listening to anybody in the town. And that's the end of 9. It was a longer chapter. So, chapter 10 starts off by talking about how old and feeble Atticus is and that he can't do anything because he's 49. So, in the scheme of things, is he older than the other fathers? Yes. The other fathers are young. They play football, they go hunting, they fish, and Atticus is not like that. He wears glasses, he likes to read, and so the kids think he can do nothing. So, in the next little bit, you have them outside with their air rifles, and I'm hoping this little section caught your eye because it has the title of your book in it. And they're out there with the rifles, and Atticus says, I'd rather you shoot at tin cans in the backyard, but I know you'll go after birds. Shoot all the blue jays you want if you can hit them, but remember, it's a sin to kill a mockingbird. Mockingbirds don't do one thing but make beautiful music for us to enjoy. So that concept of it's a sin to kill a mockingbird. Okay, so very simply, it's just written here because they have their air rifles. You can shoot blue jays and things like that, but mockingbirds are birds that don't do anything to harm us. All they do is make beautiful music for us to listen to. So it's just kind of glanced over here, but that thought is really important. So keep that idea with you as we read throughout the rest of this book. So in this little section, they're talking to Miss Maudie, trying to figure out how, like, what their dad is good at. And then you have the scene with the mad dog, which just means he has rabies. So, like nowadays, they get the rabies shot, they're good. But back then, they didn't have that. So, if you found a mad dog, you had to kill it. So, Calpurnia calls Atticus, gets the kids inside, and here comes Atticus with the sheriff. That's Hecate. He's the sheriff. You'll see him a lot. And the kids are watching this whole thing, and the sheriff is like, Atticus, I can't make this shot. You have to do it. So through this whole scene, once Atticus takes the shot for the dog, the kids realize that their father is Old One Shot. That's his nickname. And they had no idea, I mean, that their father was considered the greatest shot in the entire county. And they're just sitting there like in awe. Like, imagine your mouth open, like, I can't believe what I just saw. And Jim is like, Atticus? Never mind. Atticus? Like, you can tell he just wants to ask him all these questions, but he doesn't know how to. And so after that, they learn, of course, of his nickname. And Miss Maudie kind of tells them all about it and why Atticus never told his kids about it. And it, of course, he says he's a great marksman, and Atticus looks anything that you have that's a gift that you're really good at is from God. And for him, something that's a gift from God, you use wisely. So he doesn't go around and show off and just shoot things just to shoot things. He only uses the gift that God's given him when it's for a positive purpose. And you see that a lot in here. Okay. And of course, they can't understand why you wouldn't go brag about it. But Atticus isn't one to sit there and be boastful. He's a humble individual. That's what his character is. And then you meet Zebo, who's the garbage man, and then you learn he's Calpurnia's son. And then at the end, of course, Scout wants to go around and tell people. And Jim's like, no, I'm not going to, because if Atticus wanted people to know, he would tell them. And Scout doesn't get that. And Jim yells at her, Atticus is a gentleman, just like me. And so you see Jim wanting to be just like his father, because of the character that his father has. And that's chapter 9 and 10.